So please feel free to appear however you are most comfortable, whether that's with your camera off or on. And Cheryl, did you want to say anything, or is Adam starting us off?
Yeah, no, I just want to say hello to the Women's Foundation group again. I'm hoping that there's a few on that we met with earlier this summer, but if not, nice to meet you. I am from Treasure Coast Score, and we have a partnership now with the Women's Foundation, so you're going to see us pretty frequently this month. We've got Adam tonight, and then next week we're offering a Florida sales tax workshop, which ought to be phenomenal. And I know that was something that was asked for. And then at the end of the month, we're doing a 2-night session, Business Planning 101, but the goal is when you leave those 2 sessions, those will be working sessions. So we'll cover the material, then we'll go to breakouts. You'll have a mentor that will actually facilitate the conversation. So our goal is to have you about 85% of the way down the path of having a business plan written by the time we finish those 2 nights. So hope you can join us, because I think they're going to be both really fabulous offerings with lots of good education and lots of support. All right, so Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I look forward to this conversation.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here tonight. My name's Adam Fetterman. I am an attorney up in Martin County. I serve much of the Treasure Coast as well as Florida as a whole. Give you a little bit of my background. I've been practicing law for over 2 decades. I've served as general counsel for a number of sheriff's offices, worked with businesses across the state, as well as nonprofits. I have a background in a little bit of politics that I dabbled in when I met Takeda a little over a decade ago. And I even see some friends of mine on the call tonight. Hi, Lawanda. So to give you just a little bit of my background in the nonprofit world, I just want to share this with you just so you know why you should listen to me, aside from the fact that I was asked to be the person to talk to you tonight. And I wanted to give you just an overview of the nonprofits that I've worked with in one form or another as their general counsel. Some of them I've worked with from inception to functioning. Some of them I've worked with from inception to closing, and others I've come in at one point or another in their evolution as an organization to help them continue to grow, operate within the law, and deal with many of their issues. And so just to give you an idea of the spectrum that I've worked with, everywhere from victims' rights coalitions, clean water environmental organization, boys and girls clubs, affordable housing organizations, a Healthy Start Coalition, film festival, youth services and gang prevention, first responders dealing with PTSD, reproductive rights, helped to found a Black History Project here in Martin County. And of course, as shared in my bio, work with survivors of sexual violence. So the issues of nonprofits hit very close to home with me because we founded one, or I should say my wife founded one, and I'm her lawyer. So, and it's nightly dinner conversation as well as breakfast and lunch. And it's something that's very important to me, both in terms of my legal practice, as well as in terms of what I spend with my free time. The nonprofit world is critical. Now, I say all that, and by the time you're done with this seminar, I will have convinced at least some of you who thought about starting a nonprofit that you're out of your minds and you should do something else with your time. And if I have convinced some of you of that, then I've succeeded, because this is not for everyone and this is not for the faint of heart. I want you to know and understand the challenges that you are possibly going to embark upon. And I want you to do so eyes wide open and aware of what's at stake. And so we're going to go through that tonight. I will, throughout the presentation tonight, get very sick of hearing my own voice. So please, if you have questions as we're going along, put them in the chat box, and Cheryl or Takeda will present those questions, interrupt me, they can just wave and I'll stop talking. And then we can have questions as we go along. But I also do have time left at the end of the conversation for you to ask questions at that point. And we can at that point do so face to face somewhat. So let me go in here and share my screen with you if I can remember how to do that. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to talk with you tonight about the challenges of and steps involved in setting up a nonprofit organization. So and I've broken it down into this kind of step-by-step overview tonight. What is a nonprofit? Are you sure you want to do this? What are the first steps that you need to take if you have decided you want to do it? What filings do you need to make with the state of Florida? What filings do you need to make with the federal government? What's involved in the day-to-day operations of a nonprofit? What type of governance do you need to be prepared for? And then a time for questions and answers. One of the things that I try to do in my practice in advising nonprofits is add a little bit of value. Because I have experience not just as counsel for nonprofits, but serving on and leading nonprofit boards myself, I tend to have a bigger picture, I believe, than maybe some others who haven't done this type of work, to be able to share ideas about strategic planning, ideas about fundraising, ideas about nonprofit operations that a lawyer who's just familiar with corporate setup may not be. So I hope to be able to share some of that with you tonight. So what's a nonprofit? And sometimes you hear of it referred to as a 501c3. Sometimes you hear of it referred to as a 501(c). Sometimes you hear it referred to as a not-for-profit. They're all the same. But the basic definition of a nonprofit is a mission-driven corporation that enjoys certain tax-exempt benefits, provided that it follows certain rules. And that's not taken out of Black's Law Dictionary or anything like that. That's Adam Fetterman's definition. To qualify under 501c3, and I'll tell you what that means in a moment, requires that you have an exempt purpose and that any earnings or profits cannot go into the pockets of any one person or any shareholders. Now, when you hear 501c3, that is referring to a code of the Internal Revenue Code. All right, that is the section under the Internal Revenue Code that gives nonprofits its tax exempt status. And because I don't know the breadth of knowledge or understanding amongst those of you who are on the call, I'm going to assume you know absolutely nothing. So what does it even mean to be tax exempt? Tax exempt means that you don't pay income tax on the revenue coming in to the organization. All right. So if you own, Jenny's ice cream stand, and Jenny sells ice cream at the ice cream stand, she pays, and the customers pay sales tax on the revenue coming in, and Jenny pays to the IRS income tax on the income that comes into the business. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just making it as simple as possible. In a nonprofit organization, you don't pay income tax on the revenue that is flowing into the organization, provided that that income is related to the exempt purpose of the organization. Furthermore, when Jenny sells her ice cream cones and makes a profit, that profit comes back into her pocket or her shareholders' pockets to do with it whatever she wants. That doesn't happen in the nonprofit setting. In the nonprofit setting, while the people who work there can be paid and are entitled to be paid, and we will actually talk tonight a little bit about attitudes regarding the pay of nonprofit staff, that they cannot derive profit from it. They can't derive bonuses. If the nonprofit organization has a really great year and makes lots of extra money, it doesn't mean that the executive director makes lots of extra money. Sorry, Takeda. And I want to point out something really important here. Just because it's a nonprofit organization doesn't mean you should run it any different than any other business. And that's one of those things that I have found in working with so many nonprofits is that they forget that there needs to be a bottom line. Now, any business has different bottom lines, but a for-profit business, ultimately at the end of the day, in our capitalist system, okay? And, I don't know what the spectrum of political persuasions are of the women on the call, but I have some idea. Despite whatever your opinions may be about capitalism, that's the system we've got. And in the capitalist system, the bottom line is profit. In a nonprofit environment, you can't operate in the red just because it's a nonprofit. You still need to have an organization that operates in the black. The difference is where do those monies go after they come in? And all too often I see nonprofits that operate without following good business practices and business principles, which ultimately leads to their failure or their constant struggling for funding or to achieve their mission or so many other challenges that they face. And so it's really, really important. You're going to hear me talk about a couple of things that you'll hear throughout the themes that you'll hear throughout my presentation tonight. And it's because it comes back to you've got to operate this like a business. Just because it's a nonprofit doesn't exclude you from the basic rules of accounting, from the basic rules of law, from the basic rules of marketing, or knowing your target market, doing your research. Those types of things are all just as critical in a nonprofit, if not more so. So really important that you understand that. So to qualify under 501c3, it requires that you have an exempt purpose. What's an exempt purpose? Well, I've tried really hard to stay away from legalese in my presentation tonight. I try to do that in general in my practice. People really don't like talking to lawyers, and one of the reasons is because we generally don't speak English. But I try to, but I did take this one slide, I apologize for it, and cut and pasted directly from the IRS so that you would understand what an exempt purpose is, and so that you'd understand just how broad the exempt purpose can be to qualify under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. So an exempt purpose means that you have a charitable, religious, educational, scientific, literary, testing for public safety, fostering national or international amateur sports competition, or preventing cruelty to children or animals purpose. The word charitable itself includes relief for the poor, the distress to the underprivileged, advancement of religion, education or science, building monuments or public works, lessening the burdens on government, lessening neighborhood tensions, eliminating prejudice and discrimination, defending human and civil rights secured by law, and combating community deterioration and juvenile delinquency. Now, I am sure every one of you can think of multiple nonprofits that exist that seem to fly in the face of the exempt purposes set forth here. The IRS doesn't necessarily enforce this as stringently as they should, and that tends to wax and wane with different administrations in Washington, D.C. So we'll say that. What are the prohibitions? And if I start talking too fast, somebody give me a wave to slow down, because I have myself timed approximately to do about 2 minutes a slide, so we have time for questions. But I do tend to talk way too fast. There are some very important prohibitions to be aware of in engaging in nonprofit work. We talked about the first one. Profits cannot benefit individuals or shareholders. Again, that doesn't mean that people don't get paid. That doesn't mean that if they're employees, that doesn't mean that people don't get paid in accordance with their experience and what the market will bear. But what it does mean is that at the end of the day, if you've had an exceptional year in terms of whatever your service might be or your product that you sell, and your revenue is higher than anticipated for your budget, that doesn't mean, it means that it doesn't go into the pockets of individual people. I'm going to skip the next one and go to the last one first. Strict rules about what income is tax exempt and what isn't. If you get into the nonprofit world, your accountant, and that's one of those themes you're going to hear throughout, I'm going to continually say your accountant, because if you get into this and you don't have an accountant, you're making an enormous mistake. You will set yourself up for failure if you do not have an accountant, and not just any accountant, but an accountant who is versed in and experienced in working with nonprofits. Not every accountant is. And so it's critically important that you find one, as you build and develop your team, that you find one who is versed in working with nonprofits. You will hear about something called unrelated business income. So if you provide services to the developmentally disabled, okay, but at the same time you have a storefront where products are sold out of that storefront, certain products sold out of that storefront may, in the revenue that they generate, create what's called unrelated business income, and that is taxable. Now, this is where good lawyers and creative accountants come in. How you develop and set up that storefront may matter in terms of whether or not it's unrelated business income. For example, who do you employ in that storefront? Do you employ the clients that you serve in this developmental disability organization? If that is part of a work program for them, then the product sold there may not be unrelated business income and therefore may remain within your tax exempt purpose. And that's why it's so critical that you have lawyers and accountants who know what they're doing, working with you as part of your team. Last prohibition, and these are, there's many, many more. Please don't think that tonight's presentation is exhaustive. It may be exhausting, but it is not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm giving you the high level important keys. Political activity is not allowed. Now, there are some caveats to that, but it is important that one thing you know is that you cannot, as a 501c3, participate in campaign activity for or against any candidates. That is what is clearly prohibited. It starts to get a little murkier when it comes to what can you do in terms of lobbying or attempting to influence legislation. You cannot have that as your primary purpose as a 501c3. However, many 501c3s believe that they cannot participate in any political activity whatsoever, and that is untrue. So for example, if the Women's Foundation of Florida wants to advocate in Tallahassee for a bill that might affect women's issues, they should consult with their counsel and ensure that that issue is not political in the sense that it would impact some other aspect of their nonprofit status, but they can engage in advocacy work that is in concert with their mission and speak to members of the legislature to advocate for or against a piece of legislation that is within that can affect the scope of their work. That's really important to know. And I think that that's a misconception amongst many in the nonprofit world. I've heard from many, many nonprofit directors, oh, we can't touch that. We have to stay out of it completely. That's not entirely true. You should consult, I'm going to give you the general lawyer CYA stuff. You should consult with your own legal counsel, but you can engage in certain activity. Now, if you are interested in politics, I do that too, but that's a completely different seminar. There are other types of nonprofit organizations, 501c4s you probably have heard of, 527s you've probably heard of, PACs you've probably heard of, political action committees, or PCs, political committees, super PACs, all of that stuff. If you're interested in this seminar tonight because you want to engage primarily in political action of some sort or another and derive and enjoy the nonprofit benefits of that type of activity, call me offline and we'll have a separate conversation. That's not what a 501c3 is. It is a different scope. That's our first kind of setting the ground of what is a nonprofit. So now we're going to talk about whether or not you're sure you want to do this. And this is where I'm really going to try to convince you what a bad idea this is. And then if you make it through this, then you're on the right path. What is your why? Is a nonprofit the right tool? I want you to do your research and I want you to prepare for the sacrifice. And I mean that in every sense of the term. Let's talk about your why first. These are three critical questions I ask anybody who comes to me looking to start a nonprofit or dreaming about a nonprofit at their kitchen table. These are three critical questions that I want you to dive deep into. What are you hoping to accomplish? What's your What's your mission, your reason for existence? What's the need you're trying to fill, right? If you just want to do this because it sounds like a good idea and you want to help people, wonderful. But you need to drill down a lot deeper into what it is that you're expecting to achieve. Because depending on what you're expecting to achieve, that might turn out that the nonprofit is not the right tool for you. Or again, if looking at the political stuff, maybe you are so engaged in political activity that you want to change the world. Well, again, maybe a 501c3 is not the right tool to do so. So it's really important that you ask these questions. And I suggest, I operate with legal pads. I have 6 of them going at any time on my desk. Get a legal pad, get a composition book, get a journal, keep it at your bedside, keep it in your briefcase, keep it on your desk, keep it with you at all times, and start writing these things down. Write down your ideas, write down your dreams, write down your mission and what you're hoping to accomplish with this. And don't try to do it in any type of structured fashion. Let it be stream of consciousness, and do this for, this is not a couple of days activity. This is a couple of weeks or a couple of months activity, is what I recommend, so that you can really flesh out what it is that you're trying to do. Now, if you're anything like many of the folks that I've worked with, including the one I sleep next to every night, you're likely a dreamer, and you will fill up the first composition book and then the second composition book and possibly the third composition book before you even get to the point of talking to a lawyer. And that's great. But what I want you, it's really important that you understand and flesh these things out, because the answers to these questions are going to be critical to our next levels of analysis. So, is this the right tool? It's really important that we go through that and determine if it is. Can you accomplish your goal without the restrictions of nonprofit status? Oftentimes, the restrictions outweigh the benefits, okay? You may be able to bring in so much more revenue by not being restricted by nonprofit status because of other things you might be able to do. For example, take on an investor, right? And you'll see these kind of all flow together. A nonprofit doesn't really get an investor, right? Because there's no guarantee, there's no return on the investment. You can get a loan, maybe, highly unlikely. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? But I'm not surely not for startup. I'm just saying at some point in the development of the organization, you may be able to qualify for a loan, and you can pay the loan back with interest. But investors are generally what? They're looking for a return on their money, right? They're going to take a risk by investing with the expectation that they're going to make more money back. That's the whole point of investing. Well, it doesn't work like that in the nonprofit world. And so you are restricted just right then and there in terms of how you can fund your endeavor. If you aren't restricted in that manner and you could go take on investors and really develop a business that then could make so much revenue that you could turn around and contribute those monies to an organization trying to accomplish the public good goals you want to accomplish, that may be a better tool for you. That's the charitably minded for-profit business. There are other types of organizations that exist today. You may have heard of a public benefit corporation. And in fact, just this year, one of the organizations I didn't even list, it's an organization that has as its goal to bring greater diversity to America's boardrooms, specifically to increase the numbers of Black leaders sitting on corporate boards across America. We are working with the founders of that organization, and we just set up our first Delaware Public Benefit Corporation this past year, and helping them get off the ground. It's a really exciting project, really neat. We've learned a lot in the process because public benefit corporations are kind of new, and public benefit corporations are kind of a blending of the nonprofit and for-profit world. why do they exist? And I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but they exist because in the for-profit world, if you have shareholders and investors, you have an obligation to maximize profits for the shareholders and investors. If you don't, and there's, I know there's at least one other lawyer on the call, so if I get this wrong, please correct me. But if you don't do that, you can be subject. The people who run the organization, who run the corporation, can be subject to something called a shareholders derivative suit, which is a lawsuit brought against the directors of a company saying you didn't function in a manner to maximize the money I would get as a return as an investor. So public benefit corporation says, look, we want to operate as a for-profit entity. We want to bring on investors and be able to give them a return on their investment. But we also recognize that businesses have other goals and other important missions beyond, or I should say, in addition to making money. Sometimes they have missions that are a public benefit. And we want to be able to meld those two together without running the risk of suffering a shareholders derivative action. And that's where the public benefit corporation has come from. So it's a very exciting new world to be in. But again, as we investigate what are your goals, what are your dreams, what is your mission, we might find that a public benefit corporation is a better tool for you. Are you looking to sell products and services? I mean, I'll give you an example of a public benefit corporation. Burt's Beeswax. Anybody on here heard of that company? It's a huge, huge company. They're a public benefit corporation. They have a public mission to what they do, but they still make money for their shareholders. That's where if you're selling product, a product, typically you see nonprofits are service-based type businesses. If you're looking to sell a product, that may be better structured in a different way. Probably need to move it along here. So as part of your determining, is this something I want to do? I want you to do market research, just like any for-profit business would be. I want you to research other organizations in your service area. Your service area may be nationwide, that's fine, but whatever area you are looking to serve, I want you to find out who else is in that space. Find a unique space in which to operate. There's a principle of business out there that you can Google and learn about. You can read the whole long book. I listened to about 4 hours of the 18-hour audiobook and got the basic principle. It's called Red Oceans versus Blue Oceans. And Red Oceans versus Blue Oceans strategy applies in the nonprofit world just as much as it does in the for-profit world. The principle is this. A red ocean is red because there are lots of sharks, not this type of shark. There are lots of sharks in the water and they're eating all the fish. And there's chum in the water, right? There's blood in the water because everybody's fighting for the same fish. And they're competing with each other for the same clients or customers. And what happens in that world is things get bloody and ugly. And there's a finite amount. The goal in business should be to seek the blue ocean, those unique spaces in which to operate and where there aren't a lot of others, where there isn't competition. Now, that may not be possible, but I think it's important to look for that. Because if you're looking and you see a red ocean, it's important to ask yourself, why do I want to do this? Am I simply going to be duplicating services that somebody else is doing? And if I'm just duplicating services, why am I doing it? Is it just a vanity project? Is it just, you're sitting home at night, you think, oh, that person who runs that nonprofit is a real idiot, and I know I can do a better job. I think it's important to ask yourself that question if that's really what it's about. I say this because I've seen it. And if that's the case, I challenge you to go sit down with that organization and see how you can help them. See if you can help them build a better organization. See if you can help them build capacity. See if you can help them operate more effectively. Because as we get to the fundraising discussion later, you're going to see how very, very tight the fundraising world is. And I want to be clear. I am a person who I do not adhere to a scarcity philosophy in general. Okay, I generally believe, and this informs, frankly, much of my political beliefs, and I'm not going to share those with you tonight, but you can go Google me and find out if you want, or you can talk to Takeda and she'll tell you. I believe there's enough for everybody. I believe you can cut the pie into an infinite number of slices and everybody can have enough. However, in the nonprofit world, that doesn't always hold true, because there is a finite amount of money out there, and it is a red ocean in the funding world, and it is full of chum. So I really encourage you to consider, if you're looking to duplicate services with somebody else in a similar space, see if there's an opportunity to build capacity to them. If you find that there is some unique aspect of what you're looking to do, I want you to still understand your competition so that you can differentiate yourself from them. These are 5 things that any business should do, for profit, nonprofit, or otherwise. Sacrifice. Be prepared to sacrifice every one of these things and more. If you are going to go down the nonprofit path, you will sacrifice time with your family if you don't sacrifice your family altogether. You will sacrifice, if you're looking to do this as a side hustle or something that you want to start up while you're working another job, you will sacrifice effectiveness at that job. You will sacrifice, and if you don't sacrifice effectiveness at that job, you will sacrifice the next thing, your free time, because you will spend all of your time at work at your real job, and then you will come in home and you'll spend all your time working, your free time working on your passion project, right? With the hopes maybe to ultimately make it your job. And then trust me, it will become an 80 to 100 hour a week endeavor. You will sacrifice your sanity and you will sacrifice your pride. And I am not saying these things to be tongue in cheek. This is really hard work. I don't care if you're working with puppies. I don't care if you're working with survivors of sexual violence. I don't care if you're working with veterans. I don't care if you're working with, it doesn't matter what segment of the population you are looking to serve. This will happen. You will break down crying. I have, so please know that's not a that's not made as a gender stereotype. That many a tear has been shed at my kitchen table by me over nonprofit work. You will sacrifice your pride, and I say that because you will see that funders will ask you to do things that are nearly inhuman. They will have no respect for your time. They will have no respect for your deadlines. They will have no respect for the people and clients that you serve. They will feign support and make your lives miserable. Do I have it right, Takeda? That said, if you can get through all of these things, then maybe you can start a nonprofit. So if you've made it there, let's talk about the first steps. First steps are to build your team and then build your budget. In order to build a team, you need to start with a minimum of 3 people. And this is just the bare bones minimum by law. In order to set up a nonprofit corporation in the state of Florida, you have to have 3 board members minimum. Excuse me. A president, secretary, and treasurer. You need to ask who's going to provide the services that you're going to provide. Are you going to have paid staff? Are you going to count on volunteers? Are you going to have a working board? And let's talk about that for a moment. Virtually every nonprofit that doesn't have an angel founder, okay, somebody who comes in and either founds it themselves or has somebody who is willing to stroke an enormous check to make it happen, starts off with people as volunteers and a working board. Right from the beginning, you need to be planning for staff, and that is paid staff. And the reason being is it's really, really hard to hold volunteers and volunteer board members accountable when it is just something they do in their spare time. A staff person who punches a clock or gets a paycheck can be held accountable, and it ensures that the delivery of services will be made. Now, that said, there are some very, very effective organizations that operate, very, very strongly with the majority of services provided by volunteers. I think of two, actually, right off the top of my head. So you've got Big Brothers, Big Sisters, right? Huge organization, very successful mentoring program around the country, and they operate primarily on volunteer mentors, right? But they have an enormous structure in place, and they have staff that then trains those mentors and holds them accountable, right? Because they make a commitment. Honor Flight, if you have ever heard of the Honor Flight, an organization that takes veterans up to Washington, D.C. To visit the memorials in Washington, D.C., great organization. They operate almost entirely on volunteers, but think about what the Honor Flight often is. It's a one-time deal, right? You get on the plane to escort the often, senior veteran to Washington, D.C. and make sure they get there safely, make sure they get around safely, and then you fly back home with them, and then you're done. So keep that in mind, that volunteers either need to have a very strong commitment, or, they work really well when it's on finite projects. Yes.
Hey, Adam. Yeah, we have one question here from Rebecca, who's asking, if you started the nonprofit, should or can you be the president of the board, or should you elect someone else?
Great question.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That's in my head is one of those things to talk about, but I didn't put it in my presentation. So great question. And interestingly, I actually had that very call today with a client who is currently the chairman of the board of one of my nonprofit clients. And they don't have an executive director, and he is functioning as the executive director, and asked me, can he get paid as the executive director, but still remain chairman of the board? Maybe, but I'll tell you what my recommendation is. When I say maybe, I'm not trying to be facetious. The rules on this are vague. There is no outright prohibition on serving as the chairperson of the board of directors or president of the board of directors of a nonprofit. However, let me rephrase that. No prohibition on serving as the president or chairman of the chairperson of the nonprofit, and also serving as its paid executive director. It is not best practice, however. And the hoops that you will have to jump through in order to serve in both roles can become such a management nightmare, particularly in a smaller nonprofit. I mean, you will see sometimes in some of the very, very large national nonprofits, you will see that actually. Like, I don't know if this is correct. So if somebody Googles this and turns out I'm wrong, please don't, flame me. But the Red Cross, for example, for whatever reason, I think the Red Cross CEO also serves as a member of the board. But they also have staffs of lawyers on staff to make sure that the proper governance and accountability takes place. You're not going to likely have that. And so I recommend against it. You will likely start off in that role if you are the founder and visionary leader of the organization. And anybody who makes it through this presentation and hasn't been discouraged and wants to still start a nonprofit will likely be the visionary leader. And that person is really important. And we're going to talk about what that visionary leader role looks like when we talk about board members. So it's okay to start off in that manner, but at the point at which you're going to start to get paid, right? And hopefully that happens sooner rather than later for you, if that's your goal. That's when I suggest that you transition out of the president's position and into a paid executive director position, okay? Notice here, I think you heard me say that there'd be a theme that you will hear throughout this. I am not doing this to plug for business for me or for my accountant friends out there. You will hear me continually refer back to attorneys and accountants for a reason, because they are there to protect you, they are there to guide you, and they are critical members of a team, both from inception all the way through operation. I want you to develop a budget. again, this is before we filed anything. These are the first steps. Develop a budget for 3 to 5 years out. You're going to need that budget actually for the filings we're about to discuss. So I want you to know from day one all the way to 3 to 5 years out, how much money you got coming in. Get an idea where it's coming from. What are you going to spend it on, right? And you're going to see some forms. I'm not going to share those forms with you today, but if you go beyond today's presentation and start to look at some of the things that I've referenced, you will see some very specific forms that you will need to fill out with numbers that you're going to have to attach. You should try to have 3 to 6 months of operating funds on hand, right? Where's that going to come from? You, your family, your friends, your piggy bank, your kid's college fund. Those are the places your initial funding is going to come from. Why? Let's jump forward to the last thing, because that grant isn't there. Everybody thinks there's a grant for A or B or C or D. And if the grant that you're looking for is to start up your nonprofit, there isn't one. So know that going in, you will fund the initial steps of your organization. I've done it. So you make it through all of that, you get your first steps in order, you pull together a team, you pull together a budget, you call a lawyer, and you say, all right, I want to get this done. Now, I say you call a lawyer. You can do these things yourself, okay? And you may be concerned about the costs involved in doing so. Some lawyers will do this for you for free. Some lawyers will do this for you at a reduced rate. Some lawyers will do this for you at a normal rate, right? It's just like anything else in the marketplace. I will tell you, I have no doubt most, if not all of you, are capable of doing this yourselves if you want to. I suggest to you that you still want to seek legal guidance because it will make for a better product in the long run, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is incorporate. You're going to file articles of incorporation for a nonprofit corporation with the Florida Division of Corporations. If you get on the Google and you see that you can be any type of entity other than a not-for-profit corporation, and if it's going to be a Florida-based entity, then the Google is wrong, okay? I want you to just believe me on that. You cannot be an LLC. You cannot be an S corporation. You cannot be a C corporation. You cannot be a public benefit corporation if you want to be a 501c3 nonprofit. And that's what we're talking about here tonight. So don't believe the Google. You will see that you can file the articles of incorporation online with the state of Florida. Don't do it, okay? The reason I'm telling you not to do it is because there's a critical clause that you need to have in your articles of incorporation in order to be awarded 501c3 status by the IRS. In the online form for the state of Florida, there is nowhere to insert that language. There's no box to check to make sure that you get that language. And so what happens is you file the organization online with the state of Florida, and then you go to file your 1023, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And your 1023 is going to say, do your articles of incorporation include this language? And you're going to go, oh shit, my articles of incorporation don't include that language because I couldn't find a way to include it when I filed it online. It's one of those, little secrets that the lawyers know. So that's why as much as it pains me to do things via snail mail and kill more trees, I send all of my articles of incorporation for nonprofit startups to Tallahassee on paper.
Adam, before you move on, there's a question in the chat, and I apologize if I think it's Kamaria. How do you navigate the first step if you are listed as an individual consultant on Sunbiz and have a doing business as name? I'm not sure I'm using the right terms. I hope this makes sense. Do you want her to unmute and so you can talk with her directly?
How do you navigate this first step? Yes, please.
Kamaria, do you want to unmute so you can speak directly with Adam?
Hi, Kamaria.
Hi.
How are you?
Trying to process everything. So thank you for allowing me to come off mute. So years ago, I do HIV advocacy. So years ago, when I was asked to come and do speaking for the Department of Health, I had to register in their marketplace. And then I had to do a Sunbiz.
Okay.
And in that time, because I had like an online platform, like a hub where I was sharing information under a different name. So to I got confused and didn't want people to think the money they were paying me for speaking wasn't going towards something good. So I created a doing business as name.
Okay.
So it wasn't going into my pocket.
Okay.
But now that I want to do a not-for-profit and eventually a business one day, I'm trying to figure out how do I stop the overlap, I guess.
Well, if you're looking to use the same name, that's like for example, let's say that you have a DBA, and for anybody who doesn't know, a DBA is also referred to as a filing of a fictitious name. Okay, and you can't operate under if you have Adam's Pen Company. I like pens. I'm a fountain pen geek, right? And if I have Adam's Pen Company LLC, a business, right, but I want to sell my pens under The Best Pens Are Us, I can operate that way and do so under a different name, but I have to file the name with the state. So that's just a little background on that. The issue for you, Kamaria, is if you have a DBA that is, let's say, HIV Educational Services is your DBA, and you want your nonprofit to also be HIV Educational Services, then we're going to have an issue with the state. Okay. But that's a very specific problem, which is relatively easily fixed. Okay. Call me separately and we'll talk about how to fix that. Deal? Okay.
Thank you. Another question in the chat from Jerry. I went through a Mara lawyer to file the Florida Articles of Incorporation for nonprofit. Is it the adopted bylaws that you are referring to?
Adopted bylaws. Bylaws and Articles of Incorporation are two different things. The Articles of Incorporation are, I don't know what a Mara lawyer is. I apologize. I assume that's some type of online service. Articles of Incorporation are the documents that you file with the Secretary of State of any state, frankly, but the state of Florida, that create the entity. Bylaws are a separate document that are an internal document. They're not filed with the public, with the government. And the bylaws are the governing document for the organization. They will say how many officers there are, how many board members there are, how often the board meets, what are the rules over conflicts of interest for board members, what's the mission of the organization, are there limitations on the mission, those types of things. It's an organizational, operational type of document. That's not the same thing as the Articles of Incorporation. Does that answer your question? I hope that answers your question. If not, you can unmute too, and we'll go there. But I'm going to move on for the time being. So we talked about all of those things. Don't file them. Okay. The next thing that you will need to do with the state of Florida is file a registration for solicitation with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Many people don't know you have to do this. It's like a secret. I don't know why they keep it a secret, especially considering that failure to do so can lead to, everybody listening, criminal penalties. So it's really important that you do this. It's pretty easy, but it's critical that you do so. Do not raise money for any organization that has not filed for solicitation registration with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Okay. If you want to do this, we have a fantastic Commissioner of Agriculture right now, and Takeda and I have a really, really good friend who's one of who's her deputy chief of staff. So we can, if you have a problem, we can surely call. This is a document that you file that says, here's who's raising money, here's why we're raising money, and the idea behind it is to frankly, I don't know that it succeeds in this, but it is to try to keep fraud out of the nonprofit fundraising world. Okay, so if you were to look at the solicitation registration, you are required to name every person who will solicit money on behalf of the organization, as well as every person who will be responsible for any of the revenue that comes in from donors. And you are required to release, if any of those people have criminal backgrounds, you have to list that on the application. I do not know the effect. I probably should. I've never had the issue. I don't know the effect of what happens if somebody's listed on there who does have a criminal background. If that's important to anybody, let me know, shoot me an email. You'll get my email at the end of this, and I'll find an answer to that because now I'm curious. The registration is required even though there is an exemption. So there's an exemption for registration for entities that raise less than $25,000 in gross a year. However, even though it says it's an exemption, you still got to file a form applying for the exemption, and you still need to provide them with financial information. This is where I was talking about your budgets. This is the first step where you're going to have to provide financial projections years out in order to let the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services know how much you're intending to raise. If you are going to raise more than $25,000 a year, then you will apply, you will file a longer application, and you will have to pay a filing fee. Now, most organizations that I work with start out pretty small. I recommend to them that they file the application for exemption for $25,000 a year. However, the application fee, I think, is $75. It's not a lot of money. You are supposed to change the filing if you raise more. There is no mechanism in place for them to come back after you. If you genuinely believe you will raise no more than $25,000 a year, file for the exemption and be done with it. Critically, once you do this, you will find that there is solicitation disclaimer language that you must put on every single thing that goes out soliciting for funds. Again, failure to do these things can, again, I haven't seen it with any of my clients, but maybe that's because they listen to me most of the time. Failure to follow these rules can result in criminal penalties.
Hey, Adam, we have another question here.
Yes.
And that's probably going to be right up your alley on the sales tax. The question is, Wanda, and it says, are not-for-profit organizations subject to the same employee tax laws as for-profit? What is the maximum amount to pay without paying taxes on an admin?
I have no idea on the latter half of that question, Lawanda. I'm sorry. But yes, they have all of the same responsibilities for payroll taxes and everything of the sort, just like any other employer.
Adam, I thought that nonprofits didn't pay unemployment taxes.
Pay unemployment taxes? That may be true. That's where, remember I said you need an attorney and an accountant? So that's where the accountant comes in.
I just went through this with the foundation, and 501c3 organizations do not pay unemployment taxes at the federal or state level.
That's news to me, so thank you.
It was news to me because I thought I was going to have to pay back taxes when I realized I hadn't been paying them. And I verified that with the IRS.
Good. Well, now you know why lawyers are only half the team you need. Sorry to let you down, Lawanda. But thank you, Takeda. And that really is a perfect example of why whenever somebody comes to me and wants to start up a nonprofit, one of the very first questions I ask them is, do you have an accountant to work with? If they do not, I will not proceed until they have one, because there are tax questions that always come up, and there's different tax questions that come up in every single scenario. And I'm not a tax attorney. Never have been and don't want to be. I like this kind of work, but I like to leave the tax stuff to other people. So real quick on sales tax, because everybody asks about this, you can get a certificate to make you exempt from paying sales tax on goods. So for example, you're outfitting an office, you want to go buy a bunch of computers at Best Buy, and you don't want to pay sales tax on them, you can apply for your sales tax certificate from the Department of Revenue. However, you cannot apply for this until you have 501c3 status granted to you from the Internal Revenue Service. And you've got to excuse me a moment, my air conditioning has clicked off. I'm really sorry.
I feel like we need Jeopardy music.
Yeah, right. So sorry about that. It's just because it's automated to go up at night. All right, fantastic. Thank you, and apologize. Next, the filings with the feds. And are we okay if we go a little over? Because we're probably going to.
You can keep going and folks
Okay.
can drop off if they need to.
Okay,
We'll have
great.
the recording.
I'm sorry, I've taken more time than anticipated.
No apologies. We usually go over on our session.
Okay. The filings with the feds, Form 1023, SS4, and 990. These are your primary forms. The 1023 is the critical piece here. This is your application to the IRS for your tax exempt status. Up until a few years ago, remember what I talked about pain and sacrifice and misery? I used to charge clients a lot of money to do a 1023 because the 1023 is a miserable experience because it was 40+ pages long. However, the IRS, in one of the rare moves towards doing something of value for the public, created something called the 1023-EZ. And the 1023-EZ is 10 pages or less, and it is designed to be done by a layperson. However, I do still recommend that you either have an attorney or an accountant or both help you with it, if not do it for you outright. But it is a much simpler process. And the beauty of the 1023-EZ is it requires that you be of a certain smaller size, that you project that you'll be less than $50,000 in annual gross revenue each of the first 3 years. If you've already been in existence, which is possible, okay, you can be a for or not-for-profit in existence, not having applied for tax exempt status. I actually have a client who's in that situation. I think it's problematic because arguably they owe tax. We're trying to figure out that problem. And you have assets valued at under $250,000. Again, most startup nonprofits fit this bill. The beauty is, as long as you're not defrauding the government by intentionally misleading them, if you end up having a great year in your second year, after you've gotten your nonprofit status awarded to you, let's say you have a donor who comes in or somebody who dies and leaves you a large amount in their will, it doesn't affect you. Once you have your 501c3 status, if in the second or third year you exceed that 50% gross revenue, there's no penalty for that having happened. Plus the filing fee is half for the 1023-EZ versus the 1023. So it's a great application compared to what it used to be. It too requires the financial projections. And so you will use the same financial projections that you use for your budget, for your solicitation registration, and for your 1023 application. Okay. There, I knew I missed a slide. You must be patient. My father always used to tell me, patience is a virtue. It could take many months to a year to get your application approved. I've had them take over a year. It's miserable. It will have you sitting on the edge of your seat every single day, waiting for the letter of determination to show up in the mail. And that's where it shows up, actually, in the mail. And it's frustrating. There is nothing that can be done to expedite the process. I have seen it take as little as 3 months. I've seen it take as much as 18. So it really depends on what else they're doing at the IRS in Washington, D.C. If you want to try to operate while waiting, which many of you will want to do, what I always recommend is that, on your marketing materials, you provide, application for 501c3 status pending before the Internal Revenue Service, and to potential donors, you can provide them with a copy of your 1023 application, which gives them a lot of financial information, should make them feel comfortable. I will tell you this, high dollar donors generally are savvy charitable donors. They will not donate to a an entity that does not have its 501c3 status, unless they just want to help you because they love you or your organization's mission. Others will donate to you because they know you, right? That's your close family and friends that we talk about. Grant-making entities will not donate. I don't even know of any exceptions without the 501c3 status. So just know that that's one of those things that you know, you want to get moving as quickly as possible. Again, you can provide them with a copy of the application, let them know that the application is pending. Some people will give. It is a barrier. It's just part of the deal. However, one thing that can sometimes sway people is, I mean, I've never had an application rejected. Okay, I've had an application come back because we needed more information, but I've never had one rejected. And the deductibility, and this is the other part that when I talked about nonprofits, I should have mentioned that when people donate money to a nonprofit organization, that is tax deductible to a point. Now, tax law changed a few years ago in terms of what is deductible and what is not, and to whom is it deductible and to whom is it not. And again, that's the extent of my knowledge about it. I call my accountant when it comes to anything more involved in that. But deductibility for the donor is effective back to the date of application, because your effective date of your nonprofit status will be effective back to the date of your application. So if we make the application today, October 6th, 2021, and we get our nonprofit status awarded to us January 15th, well, your nonprofit status was effective back to the October 6th date, which is very helpful. All right. You will also file, and this is something that you can and should do online, you will file a Form SS4. The Form SS4 is the form that gets you your employer identification number, which is also known as a tax ID number. Once you go through the online application, it will give you an opportunity to ask for, do you want this mailed to you or do you want to download it now? Download it now. Save it, keep it in a safe place. Don't ever lose it. Make sure it's on a drive backed up to the cloud on your computer. You can't do anything without one, actually. You can't open a bank account. You can't have employees. Most donors or funding sources will ask for your EIN. So it's really, really critical that you have that. And there's something else actually out there called a DUNS number, which is Cheryl can probably talk more about it than I do because I know just about nothing about them. But it's another type of number that you can go out and apply for. It costs nothing to get. A lot of grant-making sources are asking for those now. So, excuse me one second.
Adam, there's a question from Jerry in the chat. What about having another nonprofit that is a 501c3 be the lead agency that then awards the grant to the nonprofit that is not yet approved by the IRS?
Thank you, Jerry. My least favorite arrangement. Jerry actually answered one of our other questions. Hold on a second. Okay, I don't know. Again, she talked about the unemployment insurance. We'll leave the unemployment insurance issues to accountants. As for the nonprofit, I'm sorry. I've heard that often referred to as one nonprofit serving as the fiscal agent for another. I'm not a fan of that arrangement, to be honest with you, but it is done. I have worked with organizations like that in the past. It is really, really critical. This is one of those situations where I will say just blank, don't do this without a lawyer and an accountant, because you want to make sure that you have the proper accounting plans in place to ensure that the money is properly segregated. You want to ensure that you have the proper legal agreement and contract or memorandum of agreement or understanding between the two entities that governs the relationship. I don't like it, generally speaking, because the situations that I've dealt with it is when my client is serving as the fiscal agent, and it takes on an enormous amount of management responsibility and liability for the other organization. And, generally speaking, I'm not one of those lawyers who just, is petrified of liabilities and risk and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I work with law enforcement agencies, and that's that end of itself is a high risk endeavor at all times. And it's just not the nature of who I am. I don't just avoid risk at the sake of risk. My free time, I race cars, so I'm pretty risk embracing. It's just one of those situations that if it's done poorly, it creates so many more problems, and I've seen it done poorly many times. So if you're going to engage in that, please ensure that you have attorneys and accountants involved to make it be sure it's done right. Okay. All right, running your day-to-day operations. We talked about this a little bit. Running a business. Nonprofit doesn't mean operating the red. Just like any other business, separate your personal, other business and jobs from nonprofits, funds, assets, and activities. You cannot commingle, okay? Commingling means a jail cell, possibly, all right? I want you to just I want to make it that serious. And it's really, really hard for some people to know this, because particularly in the nonprofit world, people are driven by passion. People are driven by personal dreams. People are driven by the desire to do good work. And they are driven often by the desire to help people, with the business end of it being secondary or tertiary. And when you let that happen, things get fuzzy. And when things get fuzzy, things don't get done right. And that's when you start to have legal problems. So what that means is, if you are operating a nonprofit organization from your kitchen table, okay, which many of them start out that way, okay, they just do, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But you need to make sure that you keep your personal endeavors and personal assets completely separate from your nonprofit. There must be a separate bank account. There must be accountability. There must be a paper trail. If you are going to contribute money to the nonprofit, then you make a record of that money. And if you're seeking reimbursement, then you ensure that somebody else is signing the checks to pay you back. These are really, really critical. And there's a lot more we could go into with that, but I'm already, over time. Document every single thing you do. If in doubt, write it down. If in doubt, send an email. Keep good, clear, solid records. It's really, really critical that you do so. You will want to do so in part because it's nice to have it 10 years to look back and see where you started, all right? But I'm saying, really, this is like lawyer stuff. Cover your ass, document everything you do. Stay on top of your legal and tax filings. Every single year, you will need to file an annual report with the Secretary of State for the state of Florida. You have to pay a fee to do it. Every single year, you will have to renew your solicitation registration or your exemption for solicitation registration. Every single year, you will have to file a 990 with the federal government. Let me see if I talked about that. Hold on. We're going to get to that in a second. And you will have all of the same issues as a for-profit entity, except maybe unemployment insurance. You have payroll issues. You still have to pay your people. You have employees. Employees get sick. Employees get lazy. Employees fight with each other. Employees have kids with the sniffles that get sick, and then they can't come to work. Employees have all kinds of issues in a nonprofit, just like they do in the for-profit world. You will have vendors that you have to deal with. You will have contracts that you will need to negotiate with your vendors. And I skipped a slide, I'm sorry. I'll come back to it in a second. You will have landlords that you have to deal with. You will have utilities. You will have maintenance of your space if you have a space. It's critical that you understand that you are running a business and you will have all of these same issues and more. I want to go back real quick to the 990. It was a form that I skipped over. You will have to file the 990 annually with the federal government. Your 990 is a reporting to the IRS about your income for the year. There are certain thresholds, and we'll make this PowerPoint available to you. I'll send it out. But the thresholds are, you can send a postcard in, which is really, really simple. It's called a 990N if your gross receipts for the year are under $50,000. You can send in a 990EZ if your gross receipts are between $50,000 and $200,000 a year and your assets are less than 500. And then you do the full 990 if your gross receipts are over 200,000 for the year or you have total assets for over $500,000. Critical. If you do not file your 990s, you will get the letter that a former client of mine got, that she just reached out to me a couple days ago to say, oh my God, what do I do? We lost our nonprofit status. Well, I hadn't heard from you in a few years. And your job to stay on top of those 990s, we now have to possibly go back and seek the reinstatement. All right, let's talk about fundraising. This is another whole separate seminar. I could talk about fundraising for hours. I'm not going to do that. I just want to hit on some real key critical points for you here. Everybody goes into the nonprofit world thinking that grants will take care of it, that grants will fund their endeavor. Grants will not do it all. Grants are miserable. Grants are demeaning and horrible. I don't know. I can't stress to you enough how much, if any of you want to get into the grant world, and maybe there's a grant writer or two on here, and they'll probably, I hope they'll say I'm absolutely right and then some. And everybody expects that they will solve all their problems. I've always suggested that you have a three-legged stool for fundraising, okay? You have grants as one source of revenue. You have a revenue source from either products or services, okay? I don't believe that you should give it away for free, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And you have to have donors, okay? Let me talk about real quick giving it away for free. All right, giving it away for free is nice, and it's what most nonprofits intend to do, but in my opinion, it's a mistake. Because if you give it away for free, then the people who are receiving it don't place value on what they're receiving. Everybody who receives the benefit of your organization, of course, there should be exceptions, but they should have some skin in the game. This is an economic principle that, Harvard economists have studied. They put a, I heard about how they did this study. They put a plate of cookies in the break room at a business. And the plate of cookies said, free, take one. And at the end of the day, there were one or two cookies had disappeared. And then they went to a different break room and they put a plate of cookies in and it said, cookies, 3 for $1. And at the end of the day, the cookies were gone and there was money on the table. The concept being, people think, if those cookies are free, they can't be that good. They don't ascribe value to the cookies, right? And this it sounds simplistic and stupid, but I really, really believe, and this is just my soapbox, but I really believe that in the nonprofit world, there will be so many who will devalue what you do that it's critical that you value what you do and that you help those that you're serving ascribe a value to it as well. Okay. In fundraising, avoid mission creep. So many nonprofits go chasing dollars and they go after a grant over here or they go after a donor over here that causes them to engage in mission creep. Mission creep is, well, we got into the process. I'll give you a perfect example with my wife's nonprofit, and I somehow have managed not to talk about her all night. She'd be very proud. I'm actually very disappointed in myself. My wife runs a nonprofit for survivors of sexual violence, and she's a survivor. She founded this organization. She's a superstar. I love her. She's amazing. And she had an opportunity, Kamaria, similar to what you mentioned, she had an opportunity to do, the health department approached her to do HIV education and actual testing. And it was a great big grant that was attached to it. And we sat down and we talked about it, and we realized while these are services that would be beneficial to many of the survivors that she works with, it is not part of the mission for what for what the Inner Truth Project was founded. And so she chose not to go after that grant and allowed it to go properly to a medical organization that had the ability to engage in HIV testing and what have you, and education. Avoid mission creep. Fundraising is about relationships. Relationships take time. Relationships have to go deep. Put the time in. Learn how to fundraise. All right. This is not an easy skill. Everybody, particularly who gets into this work, does so because they generally have a good heart and want to do good work, but they don't necessarily want to ask for money. It is a critical skill. It is the most important thing that you can do as an executive director is know how to raise money, or if you can't, to have a right-hand person who can and will. Okay. And what's amazing, there's, compared to when I started, I'm going to make myself sound really old, but compared to when I started practicing law and the internet was, a bunch of blips and bleeps and, a dial-up modem, to where what you have available today, there's so much in the way of resources available to you on the internet about fundraising, but also take the time, spend the money to find a good fundraising training program and go to it. There are many, many different techniques and find the one that resonates with you and do it and stick to it. I had engaged at one point in an organization called Benavon, and they're now called Raising More Money. And it's a fantastic, I don't even know if they still do, but that was one that I'd gone through training 2 decades ago for one of the nonprofits that I was working with, and it worked really, really well. And last, in fundraising, be prepared to sell your soul. I hate to say it. It sounds crass, but it's the truth, because you will. There are some jokes about fundraisers that are really, really off color that my wife made me promise I would not say. So call me afterwards and I'll share them with you. Set expectations for your day-to-day operations. Set realistic goals. Build on small successes. Those notebooks that we talked about at the very beginning of the seminar? They will be full of enormous ideas. I want you to then take all of those notebooks and I want you to put them aside for the someday. And I want you to sit down and take a new notebook and develop, okay, here's remember we talked about 1, 3, and 5 year budgets. I want you to then come up with, what's our 6-week goal? What are we hoping to accomplish in the next, 4 months? What do we want to accomplish this year? Set really, really small, attainable goals. I'm not trying to be a buzzkill or a dream stealer or anything of the sort. Instead, what I want you to do is stay focused on your mission, and I want you to build a foundation for greatness in the future. And I believe that you can do that by building on small successes. When you have the small successes, when you set realistic goals and succeed or exceed what you hoped for, then you will build a stronger foundation for the future. All right, governance. Build the right board of directors, know what your board member responsibilities are, and the bylaws. Who should be on your board? Everybody wants to put movers and shakers on their board. Sometimes you need doers. It's helpful to have a good smattering of both. Yes, people, this is critical. You should have a majority of people at the beginning of your organization who share your vision. I'm not suggesting that they should be a rubber stamp, but you don't want to invite people onto your board who want to take it in a different direction than you do as the visionary founder of the organization. That kind of defeats the purpose. Be careful, however, that as you grow and develop, that your board doesn't become just full of yes people. There will become a point at which you start to grow that it is critical that you have, we're going to skip ahead, to diversity of thought and experience, right? Look, I have no doubt that everyone on this call will engage in diversity of racial diversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, all of the typical diversity that we think of and are talking about so much in our culture today. But it's really important that you engage board members who have diversity of thought and experience. You want people who bring something different to the table, particularly as you grow. And I really think it's important that you have representation from your client base. That keeps you grounded in the mission with which you were founded. You'll see the one theme that you've heard throughout almost every single segment has had attorneys and accountants. You may want to consider having them on your board. They might work for free, they might not. Sometimes you should know somebody who has a professional engagement in one arena doesn't want to do that on your board. They want to bring something else. Look for those keys for each people and bring out that key in them. It's just a suggestion. And of course, everybody wants to have money people. Let's talk about what board member responsibilities are. There's really 3 segments of their responsibilities. One is to develop a vision for the organization. That's why early on, it's important that the board members share your vision if you're the founder of the organization. Their goal is to keep that vision alive and develop and change that vision over time. Their secondary responsibility, and these are legal responsibilities, mind you. Board members have responsibilities to the organization under the law. Their responsibility is to set the budget, okay? Their responsibility is to provide you with financial oversight. They should know where the dollars are going. And they have a responsibility to donate and raise money, okay? Every board member should have skin in the game, just like we talked about in the delivery of services. Every board member should be required, okay? This is unpopular with some people, but I am adamant about this with my clients. Every board that I've ever served on, every board member must contribute financially to the organization. There is not a minimum. The words are in an amount that is meaningful to them, okay? And that gives you the opportunity to have people from all over the financial spectrum on your board, if that's what you choose. But every single person on that board should contribute and be required to, as part of the board service, contribute in an amount that is meaningful to them, and then still go out and raise money. Their third responsibility, and if we'll hold those chat questions for the end, because I'm almost done. The third responsibility there is to guide and supervise the executive director. Real quick on this too, a lot of boards engage in retreats and strategic planning and exercises, and I want to be clear, you don't have to do that, okay? Some people think you have to do that every single year. I will tell you, I have sat through many a miserable strategic planning seminar with boards, and we come up with a nice, binder that has a plan for a strategic plan, and then it goes right up on the bookshelf, and nobody ever looks at it again, okay? Maybe the type of thing to do on a 3 to 5 year basis. It may be the type of thing to do for team building amongst new board members, but do not set expectations that you're going to do those things annually. Do not have meetings and retreats or strategic planning sessions just because somebody told you that you should, or for the sake of having a meeting, okay? Bylaws. You customize, these are the governing document we talked about a little earlier. This is these should be customized for your organization's needs. You can go on the Google, you can find lots and lots of great bylaws, but if you just think you're going to plug and play them, then you're selling yourself and your organization short. These should be customized for your needs. Set minimums, not maximums, all right? You want to draft in flexibility. This should be something of a living document. The bylaws should be sure to include accountability provisions and board operations, and it must contain conflict of interest policies in order for you to comply with, to get your 1023 approved for your 501c3 status, and in order to maintain your 501c3 status. You have to have conflict of interest policies. And that, my friends, brings us to the end. So if we have other questions, we can talk about them. Thank you, Takeda, for backing me up on the amount meaningful to them. You're welcome to anyone unmute themselves and ask me a question. I'll stick around
Adam,
however long you want.
it's Lawanda. I just have a quick question. On that document that you referred to that has to be filled out with the Department of Agriculture, is that for all 501c organizations such as C6, or is that just for C3s?
if you are soliciting funds in Florida as a nonprofit entity, I believe they are all required to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I could be wrong. I'll check. What did you say, 501c6?
Yes.
Okay, I'll call you tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What else? Okay, here's my contact information, everyone. Please take it down. Feel free to email me if you have questions afterwards. If you're feeling shy and don't want to do them now, I will be happy to. I'll tell you next week, I'm finishing up a trial that I started last week and got split into 2 weeks. So I will not have a ton of time next week, but if you send me an email or call me in the next couple of days, I'll surely get right back to you. It's really a pleasure to do this kind of work. I hope that it comes across that I'm passionate about it. I think it's important. I try to discourage you in part because I really just want I want you to come in eyes wide open about what you're getting yourselves into. And if you decide that it is something, then let's talk about that and make it happen for you. Because I really do genuinely believe that nonprofits serve an enormously valuable role in our community. Like I said, it is kitchen table fodder in my home every single night, and I appreciate each and every one of you for even contemplating that this is the kind of work you want to do. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about what I know with you tonight.
Well, thank you so much for your time and all of that amazing information. This recording is going to be really popular. I've already gotten numerous emails asking for the recording for tonight of folks who weren't able to jump on. So thank you again, Adam, for your time and putting together this awesome presentation. And I do kind of love that you tried to discourage folks, because I know the women in our foundation, they're the kind where if you tell them not to do something, it's going to push them that much further. So way to go.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. We are the Women's Foundation of Florida. We'll also be sending around some information tomorrow about a couple of our other upcoming programs that we have partnered with the SCORE mentors for. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me directly. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you so much.